The summer of 1987 was the hottest anyone in Millbrook County, Tennessee could remember. The corn withered in the fields, and the creek that ran behind our farmhouse had dried to nothing but cracked mud and smooth stones. My daddy, Earl Thompson, had been gone 3 years by then, taken by a heart attack while fixing fence posts in the back 40. That left just me, my mama Dorothy, and old Jasper, a stubborn, gray mule that everyone in town called worthless. The neighbors would shake their heads when they saw him standing motionless in our pasture, his ears drooping like wilted flowers. "That animal ain't good for nothing but eating your feed," they'd say with a laugh. But Mama always defended him, running her weathered hand along his neck and whispering something I could never quite hear. Jasper had been with us for 15 years, ever since Daddy bought him from a livestock auction in Nashville. He was already old then, with scars on his flanks and a stubborn streak wider than the Tennessee River. The other farmers in our area had long since switched to tractors and modern equipment, but Daddy believed in doing things the old way. "A mule's got more sense than most people," he'd say, watching Jasper work the fields with steady determination. Even after Daddy passed, Mama refused to sell him, despite the mounting bills and the constant pressure from neighbors who thought we were foolish for keeping such an unproductive animal. She'd sit on the porch every evening, watching Jasper graze in the fading light, and I knew she was thinking about Daddy. At 17, I thought I knew everything about hard work and responsibility. I'd been running our small farm mostly on my own since Daddy died, working before dawn and after sunset to keep us afloat. The bank was breathing down our necks, and every month brought new threats about foreclosure. Mama worked double shifts at the diner in town, her hands growing more arthritic with each passing day, but she never complained. She'd come home exhausted, her uniform stained with coffee and grease, and still find energy to help me with the evening chores. When people in town suggested we get rid of Jasper to save money, I started to think they might be right. After all, what good was a mule who seemed to spend most of his time standing still, staring off into the distance like he was waiting for something that would never come? The morning everything changed started like any other in our small farming community. I was up before the rooster, pulling on my work boots in the dim light of dawn that filtered through the thin curtains of our farmhouse. The air was thick with humidity, promising another scorching day that would test both man and beast. Mama was already in the kitchen, her graying hair pulled back in a neat bun, making biscuits and gravy for breakfast. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with the aroma of bacon sizzling in the cast-iron skillet that had belonged to her grandmother. She moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been taking care of others her whole life, but I noticed she was moving slower than usual, pausing to steady herself against the counter. "You feeling all right, Mama?" I asked, accepting the plate she handed me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She waved off my concern with a flour-dusted hand, the way she always did when anyone asked about her health. "Just tired, honey. These double shifts at the diner are catching up with me, that's all." But I could see the way she winced when she thought I wasn't looking, and how she pressed her hand to her chest when she thought no one was watching. The diner work was hard on her, standing on her feet for 12 hours a day, dealing with truckers and farmers who demanded their coffee hot and their meals fast. She'd been doing it for 3 years now, ever since Daddy died and left us with nothing but debt and a farm that barely produced enough to feed ourselves. After breakfast, I headed out to the barn to check on our animals, 3 chickens, 2 goats, and Jasper. The morning mist was just beginning to lift from the fields, revealing the brown patches where the grass had died from lack of rain. Our nearest neighbor, Bill Henderson, was already out in his field with his new John Deere tractor, the engine roaring as he worked the soil. He'd stop by our fence lines sometimes, leaning against the wooden posts while he shook his head at our outdated farming methods. "You're fighting a losing battle, son," he'd say, watching me work with hand tools and determination. "That mule of yours is from another century. Time to join the modern world." I'd nod politely, but inside I felt the sting of his words, knowing he was probably right. Jasper was standing in his usual spot near the water trough, his tail swishing slowly at the flies that buzzed around his legs. His coat was dusty, and his ribs were starting to show through his hide, despite the fact that we gave him the best feed we could afford. When I approached, he turned his head toward me with those dark, intelligent eyes that seemed to hold secrets I couldn't understand. "Morning, old boy," I said, running my hand along his neck the way Mama had taught me. His skin was warm from the sun, and I could feel the steady rhythm of his pulse beneath my palm. For a moment, he leaned into my touch, and I remembered what Daddy used to say about mules being able to sense things that humans couldn't. "They're closer to the earth than we are," he'd explain. "They feel things we miss." The day stretched ahead of us with the usual routine of chores and maintenance that kept our small farm running. I spent the morning repairing a section of fence that had been damaged by a fallen tree branch, the work made more difficult by the oppressive heat. Sweat poured down my face as I hammered new boards into place, stopping frequently to wipe my brow and take small sips from the water jug I'd brought from the house. Every so often, I glanced toward the house to check on Mama, but she seemed to be managing fine, hanging laundry on the line and tending to her small vegetable garden. The tomatoes were struggling in the heat, their leaves curled and brown at the edges, but she continued to water them faithfully every morning and evening. By midday, the temperature had climbed past 90 degrees, and even the insects seemed to be seeking shade. I was working in the barn, organizing tools and checking inventory, when I heard Mama calling my name from the house. Her voice sounded different somehow, weaker, more urgent than usual. I dropped the hammer I was holding and ran toward the house, my heart beginning to race with a fear I couldn't quite name. The screen door was hanging open, creaking in the slight breeze, and I could hear Mama's labored breathing from inside. When I stepped into the kitchen, I found her sitting at the table, her face pale and her hand pressed firmly against her chest. "Something's wrong," she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "I can't catch my breath." The nearest hospital was 40 miles away in Nashville, and our old pickup truck had been making strange noises for weeks. I helped Mama to the couch, trying to keep my voice calm while my mind raced through our limited options. The phone lines in our rural area were notoriously unreliable, and calling an ambulance would mean waiting at least an hour for help to arrive. Mama's breathing was becoming more labored by the minute, and I could see the panic growing in her eyes. "We need to get you to town," I said, trying to project more confidence than I felt. But even as I said it, I wondered how we were going to manage the journey. The truck might not make it, and Mama was in no condition for a rough ride over country roads. That's when I looked out the window and saw Jasper standing in the pasture, as still and patient as always, and an impossible idea began to form in my mind. The old mule cart that Daddy had built years ago was still in the barn, covered with dust and spider webs, but structurally sound. I'd seen it used only a few times in my life, usually for hauling hay or taking produce to the farmer's market. It was a simple wooden platform mounted on two large wheels, with a bench seat and a harness system designed specifically for Jasper. As I stood there looking at it, I could almost hear the neighbors' laughter, imagining what they'd say about trying to get to town in a mule-drawn cart. But looking at Mama, seeing the fear in her eyes, and the way her breathing was becoming more shallow, I knew I had to try something. Time was running out, and conventional solutions were failing us. Sometimes, the old ways were the only ways that worked. I ran to the barn with more speed than I'd ever managed before, my boots slipping on the dusty ground as I threw open the heavy wooden doors. The mule cart sat in the corner where it had been gathering dust for years, but as I examined it more closely, I could see that Daddy had built it to last. The wooden planks were solid oak, weathered but strong, and the iron wheels were still true despite their age. I grabbed some old blankets from a nearby shelf and spread them across the cart's surface, trying to make it as comfortable as possible for Mama's journey. The harness hung on a nearby peg, its leather straps cracked but still functional. I'd watched Daddy harness Jasper hundreds of times, but I'd never done it myself under such desperate circumstances. My hands were shaking as I gathered the equipment, trying to remember every detail of the process. Jasper was still standing in the pasture when I approached with the harness, his ears perked forward as if he sensed something different about this day. Usually, he was stubborn about being harnessed, requiring patience and gentle coaxing to cooperate. But today, he stood perfectly still as I approached, his dark eyes fixed on mine with an intensity I'd never seen before. "We need your help, old boy," I whispered as I began fitting the collar around his neck. "Mama's in trouble, and you're the only one who can get her to town." His ears flicked forward at the sound of my voice, and I swear I saw something change in his expression, a recognition of the gravity of the situation that seemed almost human in its understanding. The process of hitching Jasper to the cart took longer than I'd hoped, my nervous fingers fumbling with buckles and straps that should have been second nature. Every few minutes, I'd glance toward the house, where I could see Mama's silhouette through the window, and each time she seemed smaller and more fragile. The sun was climbing higher in the sky, and I knew that every minute we delayed made the journey more dangerous for both Mama and Jasper. Finally, the harness was secure, and I led Jasper toward the house, the cart rolling smoothly behind him despite its age. Neighbors in their field stopped their work to stare at the unusual sight, probably wondering what kind of fool would be taking a mule cart out in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. Getting Mama from the house to the cart required all my strength and patience. She was conscious but weak, her breathing shallow and her skin clammy with perspiration. I wrapped her in a light quilt and helped her walk slowly to the cart, her arm draped around my shoulders for support. "This is crazy, Jake," she whispered as I helped her settle onto the makeshift bed I created. "We should wait for the ambulance or try to fix the truck." But I could see the fear in her eyes, and I knew she was scared about what might happen if we waited any longer. "Trust me, Mama," I said, trying to project more confidence than I felt. "Jasper will get us there. He's stronger than people think." I climbed onto the driver's seat and took the reins in my hands, feeling their familiar weight and texture. The journey to town began slowly, with Jasper setting a steady pace that seemed to account for his precious cargo. The dirt road that led from our farm to the main highway was rough and rutted, but the mule navigated it with careful precision, his hooves finding solid ground with each step. I'd expected him to be his usual stubborn self, requiring constant urging and direction, but instead, he seemed to understand the urgency of our mission. His ears were forward, his gait steady and determined, and he responded to my voice commands with unusual cooperation. Behind me, Mama was trying to stay conscious, her hand gripping the side of the cart as we bounced over the uneven terrain. "How you doing back there?" I called over my shoulder, trying to keep my voice calm despite my growing anxiety. As we reached the main road, I could see other vehicles passing by, trucks and cars that could cover the distance to town in a fraction of the time it would take us. Some driver slowed down to stare at our unusual convoy, probably wondering what kind of emergency would require such an old-fashioned solution. A few honked their horns, whether in support or amusement I couldn't tell. But Jasper paid no attention to the noise, maintaining his steady pace with the determination of an animal who understood his purpose. The sun was beating down mercilessly, and I could see sweat beginning to form on the mule's flanks, but he showed no signs of slowing down or losing focus. His breathing was steady and controlled, and his stride remained consistent even as the miles began to accumulate. The first few miles passed in relative quiet, broken only by the sound of Jasper's hooves on the asphalt and the occasional groan from the cart's wooden frame. Mama had fallen into a fitful sleep, her breathing still labored but more regular than it had been at the house. I found myself talking to Jasper, sharing my fears and hopes with the only companion who could hear me without judgment. "You're doing great, old boy," I murmured, watching his ears flick back at the sound of my voice. "Just keep going steady like that. We'll make it to town, and Dr. Morrison will take care of Mama." The familiar sound of my voice seemed to comfort both of us, and I realized that despite all the times I doubted him, Jasper had never let our family down when it really mattered. By the time we'd covered 5 miles, word of our unusual journey had somehow spread ahead of us. I could see people coming out of their houses and businesses to watch us pass, some pointing and talking among themselves. A few called out words of encouragement, while others simply stood in respectful silence, perhaps recognizing the gravity of our situation. At the general store in Millbrook, old Mr. Patterson stepped out onto his porch and tipped his hat as we passed. "That's a good mule you got there, son," he called out, his voice carrying clearly in the afternoon air. "He'll get you where you need to go." His words gave me hope, and I felt a surge of pride in Jasper's steady performance. Maybe the neighbors had been wrong about him all along. Maybe there was more to this old mule than any of us had realized. The midday sun was becoming merciless, beating down on us with an intensity that made the air shimmer above the asphalt. I could see heat waves rising from the road ahead, distorting the landscape like a mirage, and I worried about how the extreme temperature might affect both Mama and Jasper. The mule's coat was dark with sweat, but his pace remained steady and determined, his hooves finding their rhythm on the hot pavement. I'd brought a water jug from home, and I stopped every few miles to give Jasper a drink and to check on Mama's condition. She was drifting in and out of consciousness, her face pale and drawn, but her breathing seemed to be stabilizing somewhat. "We're making good time," I told her during one of her lucid moments, though I wasn't sure if that was entirely true. As we approached the halfway point to town, I noticed a group of people gathered at the crossroads near the old Baptist church. Word of our journey had apparently spread through the rural community, and folks were coming out to offer their support. Mrs. Henderson, Bill's wife, was waiting with a pitcher of ice water and a concerned expression. "How's your mama doing, Jake?" she asked, her voice filled with genuine worry. "We heard you were heading to town." I accepted the water gratefully, using it to cool Jasper's muzzle and to wet a cloth for Mama's forehead. "She's hanging in there," I replied, though I could see the doubt in Mrs. Henderson's eyes. "This old mule's doing better than I expected. He seems to know how important this is." The support from the community was overwhelming and unexpected. People I barely knew were offering encouragement and assistance, creating a network of care that stretched along our route to town. At the next intersection, I found Tom Bradley, the local mechanic, waiting with his truck. "I could give you a lift," he offered, his grease-stained hands gesturing toward his vehicle. "Might be faster than the mule." But when I looked at Jasper, standing patiently in his harness, steam rising from his wet coat, I shook my head. "We've come this far together," I said. "He's got the heart for it, and I think Mama's more stable on the cart than she'd be bouncing around in a truck." Tom nodded with understanding, and I could see the respect in his eyes as he looked at our faithful mule. The landscape began to change as we drew closer to town, with more houses and businesses appearing along the roadside. Jasper navigated the increasing traffic with remarkable composure, neither shying away from the larger vehicles nor losing focus on his mission. I'd always known he was intelligent, but I was discovering depths to his character that I'd never suspected. His ears remained forward, alert to every sound and movement around us, but his attention never wavered from the road ahead. When a large semi-truck roared past, its engine brake thundering, Jasper barely flinched, maintaining his steady pace as if he understood that nothing could be allowed to delay our journey. Behind me, Mama stirred at the noise, her eyes opening to focus on the passing scenery. "Where are we now?" she asked weakly, her voice barely audible above the sound of Jasper's hooves and the cart's creaking wheels. "We're about 15 miles out from town," I replied, turning to check on her condition. "Dr. Morrison's office is right on Main Street. We'll be there soon." She nodded and closed her eyes again, but I could see that she was fighting to stay conscious, drawing on reserves of strength I didn't know she possessed. The color had returned to her cheeks somewhat, and her breathing seemed less labored than it had been at the house. Perhaps the steady motion of the cart and the fresh air were helping, or maybe it was simply the knowledge that help was getting closer with every step Jasper took. As we entered the outskirts of town, I could see people lining the streets, drawn by the unusual sight of a mule cart carrying a medical emergency. Some were pointing and talking among themselves, while others maintained a respectful silence, recognizing the gravity of our situation. Children ran alongside us for short distances, their excitement at seeing a real mule cart mixing with curiosity about our urgent mission. I waved at them briefly, but my attention remained focused on Jasper and the road ahead. The mule seemed to sense that we were nearing our destination, and if anything, his pace quickened slightly, his determination unwavering despite the heat and the long miles behind us. The main business district of town was bustling with afternoon activity, but traffic seemed to part naturally for our unusual convoy. Cars pulled over to let us pass, and pedestrians stopped on the sidewalks to watch our progress. I could hear fragments of conversation as we passed. "That's the Thompson boy. His mama's real sick. That old mule's been going for hours." The attention was both encouraging and overwhelming, but I focused on navigating the final few blocks to Dr. Morrison's office. Jasper's ears were forward, his neck arched with pride, as if he understood that he was the hero of this story. His hooves rang out clearly on the pavement, announcing our arrival to anyone within earshot. When we finally pulled up in front of Dr. Morrison's office, a small crowd had gathered to witness the conclusion of our remarkable journey. The doctor himself was waiting on the porch, his medical bag in hand, and a look of amazement on his face. "I heard you were coming," he called out as I set the brake on the cart. "That's quite a mule you've got there." Several people stepped forward to help me get Mama down from the cart, their hands gentle but efficient as they supported her weight. I stayed with Jasper for a moment, running my hand along his neck and feeling the heat radiating from his body. "You did it, old boy," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "You got her here safe." His dark eyes looked back at me with what I could only describe as satisfaction, as if he'd always known this day would come. Dr. Morrison's examination of Mama was thorough but quick, his experienced hands checking her pulse and blood pressure while asking rapid-fire questions about her symptoms. The small crowd that had gathered outside his office maintained a respectful distance, but I could see their concerned faces through the window, all of them invested in the outcome of our dramatic journey. "She's had a mild heart episode," the doctor explained, his voice calm but serious. "Not a full heart attack, but close enough to be dangerous. You got her here just in time." He administered medication and started in forward line, his movements precise and confident. "She'll need to stay in the hospital for observation, but I think she's going to be fine." The relief that washed over me was so intense that my knees nearly buckled, and I had to sit down in the waiting room chair. While Mama was being prepared for transport to the hospital, I went outside to check on Jasper. The faithful mule was standing exactly where I'd left him, still hitched to the cart but no longer showing signs of distress. Someone had brought him a bucket of water, which he was drinking slowly and steadily, and a small group of children had gathered around him, their eyes wide with admiration. "Is he really old?" one little girl asked, her small hand reaching out tentatively to touch his nose. "He's 15 years old," I replied, surprised by the pride in my own voice. "Everyone said he was worthless, but he just carried my mama 25 miles to save her life." The children looked at Jasper with new respect, and I realized that his reputation in the community had changed forever. Word of our journey had spread through town with remarkable speed, and people continued to arrive at Dr. Morrison's office to see the mule that had become an overnight hero. Bill Henderson, our neighbor who had always criticized Jasper, pulled up in his pickup truck and walked over to where I was standing. His expression was sheepish, and he removed his hat as he approached. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly, his eyes fixed on Jasper. "I never gave that animal the credit he deserved. What he did today, well, it's something special." He reached out to pat Jasper's neck, and the mule accepted the attention with quiet dignity. "Sometimes the old ways are the best ways," Bill continued. "I forgot that for a while." The local newspaper editor, Mrs. Sarah Collins, arrived with her camera and notebook, eager to document the story of Jasper's heroic journey. She interviewed me while I waited for the ambulance to arrive, asking detailed questions about the trip and taking several photographs of Jasper still hitched to the cart. "This is the kind of story people need to hear," she said, her pencil moving rapidly across the pages of her notebook. "In a world that's changing so fast, it's good to be reminded that some things never go out of style, like loyalty, determination, and the bond between a family and their animals." I found myself talking about Daddy, and how he'd always believed in Jasper, even when others didn't. "He'd be proud of what happened today," I said, and I meant every word. The ambulance arrived within the hour, its red lights flashing as it pulled up in front of the doctor's office. The paramedics were professional and efficient, but they also seemed impressed by our story. "We heard about your trip on the radio," one of them said as they loaded Mama onto the stretcher. 25 miles in a mule cart. That's something you don't see every day." Mama was conscious and alert, her color much improved from when we'd started the journey. "Thank you," she whispered as they wheeled her past Jasper. "Thank you for not giving up on an old mule." I squeezed her hand and promised to visit her at the hospital as soon as I got Jasper settled back home. The return journey was very different from our urgent trip to town. Without the pressure of a medical emergency, I could appreciate the beauty of the countryside and the remarkable endurance that Jasper had displayed. He seemed less tired than I'd expected, his pace still steady even though we'd already covered 25 miles. Several people along the route waved at us, and a few cars honked their horns in recognition of our earlier heroics. I found myself talking to Jasper more than I ever had before, sharing my thoughts about the day and my growing respect for his character. "I'm sorry I ever doubted you," I said as we passed the crossroads where Mrs. Henderson had given us water. "You're not worthless at all. You're the most valuable thing we own." As we approached our farm, I could see Bill Henderson waiting by our gate with several other neighbors. They'd prepared a special meal for Jasper, fresh oats, sweet feed, and clean water, and they wanted to hear every detail of our journey. The mule accepted their attention graciously, as if he understood that he'd earned their respect through his actions rather than their words. Mrs. Henderson had tears in her eyes as she watched Jasper eat, and she kept shaking her head in amazement. "I'd never seen anything like it," she said. "That animal knew exactly what needed to be done, and he did it without complaint." I unhitched Jasper from the cart and led him to his pasture, where he immediately began grazing as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But I knew that everything had changed, not just for Jasper, but for all of us who had witnessed his remarkable feat. The next morning brought a steady stream of visitors to our farm, all wanting to see the mule that had become famous overnight. The local radio station had picked up the story, and by noon, a reporter from Nashville had called asking for an interview. I found myself in the unusual position of being a spokesperson for Jasper, trying to explain what made him special to people who had never met him. "He's always been intelligent," I told the reporter. "But I think what happened yesterday showed that he is something more than intelligence, he is heart." The reporter scribbled notes, while taking photographs of Jasper grazing peacefully in his pasture, looking for all the world like an ordinary farm animal rather than a hero. Mama called from the hospital that afternoon, her voice stronger than it had been in months. The doctors were pleased with her progress and expected to release her within a few days. "How's our hero doing?" she asked, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "Everyone here is talking about Jasper. The nurses can't believe a mule carried me all that way." I looked out the window at Jasper, who was standing in his favorite spot near the water trough, and I felt a wave of gratitude that threatened to overwhelm me. "He's doing fine," I replied, acting like nothing happened, but I think he knows he's famous now. The truth was, Jasper seemed remarkably unchanged by all the attention, maintaining his usual calm demeanor while accepting the praise and treats that visitors brought him. The story of Jasper's heroic journey spread far beyond our small community, picked up by newspapers and radio stations across Tennessee and beyond. By the end of the week, we received letters from people in other states, sharing their own stories about special animals and thanking us for reminding them that true worth isn't always obvious. One letter came from an elderly woman in Kentucky who wrote about her own mule, describing how he'd helped her family through the Great Depression when modern equipment failed. "Animals like Jasper understand things we've forgotten," she wrote. "They know that love and loyalty are more valuable than speed or efficiency." Her words stayed with me, helping me understand that our experience was part of something larger and more meaningful. The attention brought unexpected opportunities as well. A livestock magazine wanted to feature Jasper in an article about working animals, and a local feed company offered to sponsor his care in exchange for using his story in their advertising. But the most meaningful recognition came from our own community, where people who had previously dismissed him now spoke of him with genuine respect. Children would ask their parents to drive past our farm just to see the hero mule, and several neighboring farmers admitted that they were reconsidering their own attitudes toward traditional farming methods. "Maybe there's wisdom in the old ways that we've been too quick to abandon," one farmer told me. "Your mule proved that some things are worth preserving." The financial impact of Jasper's fame was modest, but significant for our struggling farm. The feed company's sponsorship covered his care costs, and the small fees from interviews and photographs helped with other expenses. More importantly, the attention had brought customers to our farm who were interested in buying eggs from our chickens and vegetables from Mama's garden. People seemed to want to support the family whose mule had captured the community's imagination, and their purchases made a real difference in our monthly budget. For the first time since Daddy's death, I felt hopeful about our ability to keep the farm running without depending entirely on Mama's exhausting work at the diner. As the immediate excitement began to fade, I found myself spending more time with Jasper, trying to understand what made him so special. He was still the same mule he'd always been, sometimes stubborn, often independent, but always intelligent and aware of his surroundings. The difference was in how I saw him, and how the community saw him. We'd learned to look beyond the surface and recognize the qualities that really mattered: loyalty, determination, and an unshakable commitment to the people he cared about. Watching him graze in the evening light, I realized that Daddy had seen these qualities all along. "A mule's got more sense than most people," he'd said, and now I understood what he meant. Jasper had always been valuable. We'd just been too blind to see it. The transformation in our relationship was profound and lasting. Where once I'd seen Jasper as a burden, I now saw him as a partner and a friend. Our daily routines became more collaborative, with me asking for his help rather than demanding his compliance. He seemed to sense the change in my attitude, responding with increased cooperation and what I could only describe as affection. When I worked in the fields, he would often position himself where he could watch me, and when I called his name, his ears would perk forward with unmistakable attention. The bond between us had been forged in crisis, but it was strengthened by mutual respect and understanding. The story of Jasper's heroic journey became part of our family's legacy, passed down through conversations and retold at community gatherings. Years later, when people talked about the summer of 1987, they would always mention the mule that carried Dorothy Thompson to town and saved her life. But for me, the most important part of the story wasn't the dramatic rescue or the community recognition. It was the lesson I learned about seeing value where others see only worthlessness, about trusting in qualities that can't be measured by conventional standards, and about the power of loyalty and love to accomplish what seems impossible. Jasper taught me that true worth isn't always obvious, but it's always there for those who know how to look for it. 3 weeks after our famous journey to town, Mama came home from the hospital with a clean bill of health and a new appreciation for life. The doctors had adjusted her medications and recommended a lighter work schedule, which meant she could finally reduce her hours at the diner. The financial breathing room provided by Jasper's newfound fame made this possible, and for the first time in years, our family felt like we had some control over our destiny. Mama spent her first day home sitting on the porch, watching Jasper graze in the pasture and shaking her head in wonder. "I knew he was special," she said quietly. "Your daddy always said that Mule had a good heart, but I never imagined he'd prove it in such a dramatic way." The local veterinarian, Dr. Patterson, came by to give Jasper a complete checkup, wanting to ensure that his heroic journey hadn't caused any long-term damage. He was amazed by the mule's physical condition, especially considering his age and the distance he traveled in extreme heat. "This animal is in remarkable shape," he announced after his examination. "His heart rate is strong, his joints are sound, and his muscle tone is excellent. Whatever you've been doing to care for him, keep it up." The clean bill of health was another source of pride for our family, confirmation that we'd been doing something right even when others criticized our methods. Dr. Patterson's praise carried weight in the community, and word of Jasper's excellent health spread quickly among the neighboring farms. The story of our journey had attracted attention from animal welfare organizations, who were interested in Jasper as an example of proper mule care and the importance of the human-animal bond. A representative from the American Mule Association visited our farm, spending an entire afternoon observing Jasper and asking detailed questions about his history, training, and daily routine. "He's a perfect example of what mules can accomplish when they're treated with respect and understanding," she told me. "Too many people think of mules as stubborn or difficult, but the truth is they're incredibly intelligent and capable animals. Your Jasper proves that point beautifully." Her visit resulted in an invitation for us to attend the National Mule Show, where Jasper would be honored for his heroic service. The recognition from the mule community was particularly meaningful because it came from people who understood the true nature of these remarkable animals. At the National Show, held in Columbia, Tennessee, Jasper was presented with a special award for outstanding service to the community. Standing in the arena with hundreds of mule enthusiasts applauding, I felt overwhelmed by the journey that had brought us to this moment. Jasper stood calmly beside me, his ears forward and his eyes alert, as if he understood the significance of the occasion. The presenter, an elderly man who had worked with mules his entire life, spoke about the importance of recognizing animals who demonstrate extraordinary loyalty and courage. "This mule represents the best qualities of his breed," he said. "Intelligence, determination, and an unbreakable bond with his human family." The trip to Columbia was Jasper's first time away from our farm since the day he carried Mama to town, and he handled the new environment with typical composure. Other mule owners were impressed by his calm demeanor and his obvious trust in me, noting that such confidence usually came from years of consistent, respectful handling. "You can tell he's been loved," one experienced trainer told me. "Mules that have been mistreated never develop this kind of partnership with their owners." What you have with Jasper is special." His words reinforced what I'd come to understand about our relationship, that it was built on mutual respect and trust rather than dominance and submission. The awards ceremony was covered by several agricultural publications, and Jasper's story reached an even wider audience of farmers, ranchers, and animal lovers. Letters continued to pour in from across the country, many from people who shared their own stories of remarkable animals who had made a difference in their lives. One particularly moving letter came from a veteran who wrote about his therapy horse, describing how the animal had helped him recover from combat trauma. "Animals like your Jasper remind us what really matters," he wrote. "They don't care about our problems or our mistakes. They just love us and do their best to help when we need them most." These letters helped me understand that Jasper's story had touched something deeper than just admiration for a heroic animal. It had reminded people of the healing power of the human-animal bond. Back home, life settled into a new routine that incorporated Jasper's celebrity status while maintaining the rhythms of farm life. Visitors continued to arrive regularly, but they were respectful and genuinely interested in learning about mules and traditional farming methods. Several agricultural colleges sent students to observe our operation, using Jasper as an example of sustainable, animal-powered agriculture. I found myself becoming an advocate for working animals, speaking to groups about the value of maintaining traditional skills and relationships in an increasingly mechanized world. "Machines break down," I would tell audiences, "but a good mule will carry you through any crisis as long as you treat him right." The speaking engagements brought in modest fees that helped support the farm, but more importantly, they spread awareness about the importance of preserving traditional farming knowledge. The transformation in community attitudes toward Jasper was complete and permanent. Neighbors who had once criticized our reliance on outdated methods now sought our advice about animal husbandry and sustainable farming practices. Bill Henderson, our formerly skeptical neighbor, had purchased his own mule and asked me to help him learn proper training techniques. "I've been farming with machines for 20 years, he admitted, "but watching what Jasper did made me realize I've been missing something important. There's a connection with the land that you can't get from a tractor seat." His willingness to learn represented a broader shift in our rural community, where traditional methods were gaining new respect and appreciation. The success of Jasper's story also brought attention to the broader challenges facing small family farms in our region. Journalists who came to interview us about the heroic mule ride often stayed to discuss the economic pressures that threatened rural communities. Our story became part of a larger narrative about the value of traditional farming methods and the importance of supporting local agriculture. Several articles appeared in national magazines, using our farm as an example of how families could succeed by combining old-fashioned values with modern marketing techniques. The publicity helped us establish direct sales relationships with customers in Nashville and other urban areas, creating new income streams that made the farm more financially sustainable. As autumn approached, Mama's health continued to improve, and she was able to return to part-time work at the diner. Her experience had given her a new perspective on life's priorities, and she spent more time enjoying simple pleasures like watching Jasper graze in the evening light or tending her garden without the pressure of economic necessity. "I've learned not to take anything for granted," she told a reporter who visited to do a follow-up story. "Every morning I wake up, I'm grateful for another day, and I'm grateful for the mule that made it possible." Her words captured the essence of what our family had learned through the crisis, that true wealth came from love, loyalty, and the bonds that connected us to each other and to the land. The approaching anniversary of our dramatic journey to town was marked by planning for a community celebration that would honor Jasper and raise awareness about rural healthcare challenges. The event was organized by local volunteers who wanted to use our story to highlight the need for better emergency services in rural areas. What happened to your family could happen to anyone, the organizer explained. We want to make sure that next time, families have more options than depending on a heroic mule. The celebration would include demonstrations of traditional farming techniques, educational booths about animal care, and testimonials from community members whose lives had been touched by Jasper's story. For me, it represented the perfect way to honor both Jasper's heroism and the broader lessons his journey had taught our community. The community's celebration in honor of Jasper's heroic journey took place on a perfect October day, with clear skies and the kind of crisp autumn air that made every breath feel clean and fresh. The event was held at the county fairgrounds, and people came from all over Tennessee and neighboring states to meet the famous mule and hear our story firsthand. Local craftsmen demonstrated traditional blacksmithing and woodworking techniques, while farmers displayed antique equipment and explained how it had been used in earlier generations. Children lined up to pet Jasper and have their pictures taken with him, and he accepted all the attention with his characteristic dignity and patience. "He's like a celebrity," one little boy observed, his eyes wide with wonder, as he stroked Jasper's nose. "But he's still just a regular mule, isn't he?" The question captured something important about Jasper's appeal. He was extraordinary precisely because he was ordinary, a common farm animal who had risen to greatness through loyalty and determination. The keynote speaker at the celebration was Dr. Temple Grandin, the famous animal behaviorist, who had driven down from Colorado specifically to meet Jasper and discuss the intelligence of working animals. Her presentation drew a crowd of several hundred people, including farmers, veterinarians, and animal lovers who were fascinated by her insights into animal cognition and behavior. "Animals like Jasper possess a kind of practical intelligence that we often underestimate," she explained to the attentive audience. "They can assess situations, make decisions, and take action based on their understanding of what needs to be done. What makes Jasper's story so remarkable is not just his physical endurance, but his ability to recognize an emergency and respond appropriately." Her scientific perspective on Jasper's heroics added credibility to what many people had already sensed, that his actions went far beyond simple obedience or training. During the celebration, several other mule owners shared their own stories of remarkable animal intelligence and loyalty, creating a rich tapestry of experiences that highlighted the unique qualities of these often misunderstood creatures. One farmer from Kentucky told about his mule's ability to detect dangerous weather conditions hours before official warnings were issued, while another described how her mule had guided rescue workers to find an injured hiker in dense woods. These stories reinforced the message that Jasper's heroism, while extraordinary, was part of a larger pattern of animal intelligence and dedication that deserved recognition and respect. The audience listened with growing appreciation for the complex relationships between humans and their animal partners, relationships that had sustained rural communities for generations. The celebration also featured a fundraising component, with proceeds going toward improving emergency medical services in rural areas of the county. The organizers had recognized that while Jasper's heroic journey had saved Mama's life, not every family would have such a resourceful solution available in a crisis. Mobile medical units, improved communication systems, and strategically placed emergency supplies could help ensure that future medical emergencies would be handled more efficiently. "Jasper showed us what's possible when we don't give up," explained the county emergency coordinator. "But we also learned that our rural communities need better support systems for medical crises. This celebration is about honoring a hero and improving our preparedness for the future." The dual purpose of the event, celebrating the past while planning for the future, reflected the balanced approach our community was taking toward preserving traditional values while embracing necessary improvements. Media coverage of the celebration was extensive, with television crews from Nashville and Memphis broadcasting live from the fairgrounds throughout the day. The story of Jasper's heroic journey had captured national attention, and reporters were eager to explore the broader themes of rural life, animal intelligence, and community resilience that his story represented. I found myself being interviewed repeatedly, trying to articulate what Jasper meant to our family and our community. "He taught us not to judge by appearances," I explained to one television reporter. "Everyone thought he was worthless because he was old and stubborn, but when it really mattered, he showed what he was made of." I think there's a lesson there for all of us about looking deeper and not giving up on things that seem past their prime. The celebration concluded with a special ceremony honoring not just Jasper, but all the working animals that had contributed to the development of rural America. Local veterans were invited to share stories about military horses and mules that had served in various conflicts, while farmers talked about the crucial role that animals had played in establishing and maintaining agricultural communities. The ceremony created a sense of historical continuity, linking Jasper's modern heroics to a long tradition of partnership between humans and animals. "These animals were the engines that built our communities," observed the county historian. "They cleared the land, pulled the plows, and carried our ancestors to safety when they needed help." Jasper's story reminds us that this partnership is still alive and still valuable, even in our modern world. As the sun set over the fairgrounds and the crowds began to disperse, I led Jasper back to the trailer for the journey home. He had been on display for nearly 8 hours, meeting hundreds of people and posing for countless photographs, but he showed no signs of stress or fatigue. If anything, he seemed to have enjoyed the attention and the opportunity to interact with so many admirers. "You did good today, old boy," I told him as we loaded him into the trailer. "Daddy would have been proud to see you being honored like this. He always knew you were special, even when the rest of us couldn't see it." The drive home was peaceful and reflective, with both of us content in the knowledge that we had honored the memory of our heroic journey while building something positive for the future. The success of the celebration marked a new chapter in Jasper's story and in our family's relationship with the community. We had become inadvertent ambassadors for traditional farming methods and the importance of the human-animal bond, roles that we embraced with growing confidence and enthusiasm. Speaking engagements and farm visits became regular parts of our routine, allowing us to share Jasper's story with audiences across the region. But perhaps more importantly, the experience had taught us to see ourselves and our way of life as valuable and worth preserving, rather than outdated remnants of a bygone era. Jasper's heroism had saved Mama's life, but it had also saved our farm and our sense of purpose in a rapidly changing world. Winter brought a quieter pace to our farm, but Jasper's reputation continued to grow through articles, speaking engagements, and the steady stream of visitors who made the pilgrimage to meet the famous hero Mule. The cold months gave us time to reflect on how dramatically our lives had changed since that desperate journey to town, and to plan for the future with a confidence we'd never felt before. Mama's health remained stable, and her reduced work schedule allowed her to enjoy activities that had been impossible during the years of financial struggle. She took up quilting again, a hobby she'd abandoned when she started working double shifts, and she began documenting our family's history in a journal that she hoped to pass down to future generations. "Jasper's story needs to be remembered," she explained, her pen moving steadily across the pages. "Not just the heroic part, but everything, how your daddy saw his potential, how the community changed their minds, how we learned to value what we had instead of wishing for what we didn't have." The journal project became a family endeavor, with me contributing my own memories and observations about Jasper's character and our relationship. Writing about our experiences helped me understand how much I had changed during the months since Mama's medical crisis, evolving from a teenager who saw Jasper as a burden into a young man who recognized him as a partner and teacher. "He taught me patience," I wrote in one entry. "Before the journey to town, I was always pushing to get things done faster, to modernize everything, to prove that we could compete with the bigger farms. But Jasper showed me that slow and steady has its own value, that reliability matters more than speed, and that sometimes the old ways work better than the new ones. The process of documenting our story helped us appreciate not just Jasper's heroism, but the entire journey of discovery that had followed. Spring brought new opportunities and challenges as Jasper's fame continued to attract attention from unexpected quarters. A Hollywood producer contacted us about the possibility of making a movie based on our story, and while the idea was flattering, we were cautious about maintaining the integrity of Jasper's legacy. "It's a heartwarming story with universal appeal," the producer explained during his visit to our farm. "The themes of loyalty, perseverance, and finding value in unexpected places would resonate with audiences everywhere." But after careful consideration, we decided that Jasper's story was more powerful as lived reality than as Hollywood fiction. Instead, we agreed to participate in a documentary that would explore the broader themes of rural life, traditional farming, and the human-animal bond, using our experience as one example among many. The documentary project brought film crews to our farm several times throughout the spring and summer, capturing the daily rhythms of our life and Jasper's continued role as both working animal and celebrity. The filmmakers were particularly interested in showing how traditional farming methods were being integrated with modern marketing and communication techniques, creating a sustainable model for small family farms. Jasper was featured prominently in the film, but always in the context of his working relationship with our family rather than as a performing animal. "He's not a trick pony," I explained to the director. "He's a working mule who happened to do something heroic. The heroism came from his character, not from any special training or tricks. That's what makes the story meaningful. Anyone can recognize loyalty and determination when they see it." The completed documentary premiered at a film festival in Nashville, drawing an audience of farmers, animal lovers, and urban viewers who were curious about rural life. The film's message about the enduring value of traditional skills and relationships resonated strongly with audiences who were increasingly concerned about the loss of connection to the land and to working animals. Reviews praised the documentary's authentic portrayal of rural life and its celebration of the bonds between humans and animals that had sustained agricultural communities for generations. "This film reminds us that progress doesn't always mean abandoning the past," wrote one critic. "Sometimes, the most important advances come from rediscovering and preserving the wisdom that previous generations took for granted." The success of the documentary led to speaking opportunities at agricultural conferences and universities, where I found myself representing not just Jasper's story, but the broader cause of sustainable farming and the preservation of traditional skills. These presentations allowed me to share what we'd learned about the value of working animals and the importance of maintaining connections to historical farming practices. Young farmers, in particular, were interested in our experience, seeing in Jasper's story a validation of their own desires to farm in ways that honored both efficiency and tradition. "Mules might not be faster than tractors," I would tell these audiences, "but they don't break down, they don't need fuel, and they can make decisions that machines can't make. In a crisis, that intelligence and reliability can make all the difference." As Jasper entered his 17th year, his health remained remarkably good, though we began to make accommodations for his advancing age. His workload was reduced, and we added supplements to his diet to support his joints and overall condition. Dr. Patterson continued to marvel at his fitness, attributing it to a combination of good genetics, consistent care, and the purposeful life he'd always lived. "Working animals often live longer than pampered pets," the veterinarian observed. "Jasper has always had a job to do and a family that depended on him. That sense of purpose keeps animals healthy and alert well into their old age." His words reinforced our commitment to keeping Jasper active and engaged, balancing his celebrity status with meaningful work that honored his nature as a working animal. The approach of the second anniversary of our famous journey to town prompted discussions about how to commemorate the date without turning Jasper into a mere symbol rather than a living, breathing animal with his own needs and preferences. We decided on a quiet celebration at the farm, inviting close friends and supporters to share a meal and reflect on what Jasper's story had meant to our community. The guest list included the veterinarian who had cared for him, the neighbors who had supported us during the crisis, the reporters who had told his story with respect and accuracy, and the farmers who had been inspired by his example to reconsider their own relationships with working animals. It was a gathering that honored both the heroic moment and the ongoing legacy of changed attitudes and renewed appreciation for traditional values. The second anniversary celebration at our farm was intimate and meaningful, bringing together the people who had been most important in Jasper's journey from overlooked farm animal to celebrated hero. As we gathered around tables set up in the shade of our old oak tree, I looked at the faces of neighbors, friends, and supporters who had become an extended family united by their connection to Jasper's story. Mama had prepared her famous fried chicken and cornbread, while neighbors contributed side dishes and desserts that created a feast worthy of the occasion. Jasper himself was the guest of honor, standing nearby with his usual dignity, while children and adults alike took turns offering him treats and gentle pats. 2 years ago, I never imagined we'd be celebrating like this, Mama reflected, her voice carrying a mixture of wonder and gratitude. That day changed everything for us, and I'm still amazed by how much good came from such a frightening experience. Dr. Morrison, who had treated Mama during the medical crisis, spoke about how Jasper's heroic journey had inspired improvements in rural emergency medical services throughout the region. New protocols had been established for remote area emergencies, and communication systems had been upgraded to ensure faster response times. Jasper saved your mother's life through his heroism, the doctor explained to the gathered crowd. But his story also helped save other lives by highlighting the challenges we face in providing medical care to rural communities. Sometimes it takes a dramatic example to motivate the changes that should have been made long ago. His words reminded everyone that Jasper's legacy extended far beyond our family, touching the lives of people who would never meet him, but who benefited from the awareness his story had created. The celebration included presentations from several organizations that had been influenced by Jasper's story, including the American Mule Association, which had established a scholarship fund for young people studying traditional farming methods. Agricultural colleges had reported increased interest in courses on animal husbandry and sustainable farming practices, while working animal sanctuaries had seen a surge in volunteers and donations from people inspired by Jasper's example. One mule's heroic act has rippled outward to benefit countless animals and the people who care for them, explained a representative from the Mule Association. Jasper represents the best qualities of his breed, and his story has helped change public perception of working animals from outdated tools to valuable partners. The scope of his influence was both humbling and inspiring, demonstrating how individual acts of courage and loyalty could create lasting positive change. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across our pasture, I found myself reflecting on the lessons that Jasper's story had taught our community about recognizing value in unexpected places. The mule that neighbors had dismissed as worthless had proven to be more valuable than any of the expensive equipment that surrounded our farm. His worth hadn't been measured in speed or efficiency, but in character qualities that couldn't be quantified: loyalty, intelligence, determination, and an unshakable commitment to the people he loved. The best things in life aren't always the newest or the fastest, I told the anniversary gathering. Sometimes they're the things that have been there all along, waiting for us to appreciate them. Jasper taught us to look past the surface and see what really matters. The anniversary celebration also served as a platform for announcing new initiatives inspired by Jasper's legacy, including a program to preserve traditional farming skills and knowledge that were in danger of being lost. Local high schools would begin offering courses in animal husbandry and traditional agriculture, while experienced farmers would serve as mentors for young people interested in learning time-tested methods. "We almost lost this knowledge," admitted the county extension agent who was coordinating the program. "If it hadn't been for Jasper's story reminding us of the value of working animals and traditional methods, we might have continued to let these skills disappear. Now we have a chance to preserve them for future generations, who may need them more than we realize." As evening approached and the celebration began to wind down, I walked with Jasper to his favorite spot near the water trough, where he could survey his domain while enjoying the cool evening breeze. At 18 years old, he was showing some signs of age, a slightly slower gait, a few gray hairs around his muzzle, but his eyes remained bright and alert, and his spirit seemed as strong as ever. "You've had quite a journey, old friend," I said, running my hand along his neck and feeling the familiar warmth of his hide. "From the mule nobody wanted to the hero everyone admires. But you know what? You haven't changed at all. You were always special. We just needed to learn how to see it." His ears flicked forward at the sound of my voice, and he turned his head to look at me with those dark, intelligent eyes that seemed to hold so much wisdom. The success of Jasper's story had secured our farm's future and provided us with opportunities we'd never imagined. But perhaps more importantly, it had taught us to value what we already had rather than constantly seeking something better. Our small farm was now profitable and sustainable, combining traditional methods with modern marketing to create a viable business model. Mama's health remained stable, and she had found a new purpose in documenting and sharing our family's story with others who face similar challenges. I had discovered a calling as an advocate for working animals and traditional farming methods, speaking to audiences across the region about the lessons Jasper had taught us. But the greatest gift of all was the deepened relationship between our family and the remarkable mule who had saved Mama's life and transformed our understanding of what it meant to be truly valuable. As the last guest departed and we cleaned up the remnants of our celebration, I realized that Jasper's story was far from over. He continued to serve as an ambassador for working animals and traditional values, inspiring people to reconsider their assumptions about worth and usefulness. Children who met him often asked if they could have a mule like Jasper, while adults reflected on the relationships in their own lives that they might have undervalued. His legacy had become larger than his individual heroism, encompassing broader themes of loyalty, perseverance, and the importance of recognizing value in unexpected places. "That mule's worthless," they had said, but Jasper had proven that true worth comes from character rather than appearance, from heart rather than speed, and from the willingness to serve others when they need it most.